All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started here, guys. Obviously, we want to be respectful of everyone's time tonight. Appreciate you being with us. It's been a few months, so welcome back. Obviously, with the SMSE and things like that, it got a little busy there later in the spring, early in the winter, and so we decided to hold off for a couple months. But what we wanted to do tonight was just dive into this topic of self-organization. I mean, obviously, I think this has always been somewhat of a hot topic. I think there's quite a bit of misunderstanding potentially around what it is and what it isn't. And if you guys were on Twitter, I believe it was Twitter right before, a couple of weeks right before the SMSC, there was a little back and forth going on again about what it is and what it isn't. There just seems to be a lot of confusion. And so I think we wanted to do, and we thought it'd be a very wise idea to really just open the floor tonight and really do just that, dive into what it is, what it isn't. We're hoping for a lot of questions tonight around things that you guys maybe are confused on, some questions around things that maybe what you've seen. Is this self-organization? Is it not? It really just, we want to open the floor and dive into anything regarding this topic. So really what I want to do right now is just kind of give you guys the floor and give us a chance, or give you guys a chance to kind of fire away at us and see if we can't come to some sort of common ground tonight. So with that being said, is there anybody that wants to get us going? Anybody that has a question in mind? Anybody that has any thoughts pertaining to this particular topic? Wyatt, I know you got something, man. Come on, let's go.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I mean, honestly, just probably for everyone's well-being, including my own, can you just give, I guess, talk a little bit about self-organization, I guess, and, even if it's just a description and how you might see it, just a general example.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and start, and I know Sean and Tyler obviously are going to want to jump in a little bit, and they can certainly add some different thoughts. But honestly, I feel like the concept in and of itself is probably made even a little bit too difficult. I know that the underlying concepts of it, I think there's definitely some. There's just a lot of ecological dynamic type concepts that go into it. But I do, like I said, I do believe that it is made a little bit too difficult. I think for me, when I think about self-organization, I think about, well, first of all, what I think is misconceived is that this is just throw a kid that can't swim in the deep end of a pool and sit back in a lawn chair and watch him figure it out. I mean, it's just simply not what it is. The coach is very, very involved in the process. It's just understanding when to give feedback, how to give feedback, and most importantly, I believe, allowing for the athlete to find their way, to interact with the environment and the tasks that have been set up. And really it's on the coach to not provide solutions. We talk about this idea of self-organization. It's really about the athlete themselves searching for their own solution. So I, as a coach, need to understand that it's not me being a solution giver. And so this process of self-organization for me, I like to use the analogy, and I certainly didn't make this up. It just makes sense to me, but just like learning how to drive a car. When the first time you hop into a car with whoever's teaching that driver's training class, you don't go on to some busy interstate where the speed limit's 75 miles an hour. Obviously, that's not a situation that you're going to be able to handle with the low level of experience you do have. And so what you do, well, you go out on some back roads. You're still in an alive setting. There's still other cars there. There's still pedestrians. There's still traffic signals. Like, you still have to interact with that environment. But at the same time, it's not something that you can't digest yourself. And so for me, that's kind of how I see self-organization, is the coach setting up a proper environment, a proper task that the learner, based on where they're at that given time, can fully digest, and then stepping back and watch them organize themselves and watch them find solutions to the problems that they've set up. And again, it's all about the coach not providing the solution. I think that's kind of the crux of the whole thing. So if you as a coach are telling, hey, this is how I want you to do it, or hey, this is what I'm looking for, hey, this is what I want you to do, I believe you're interfering with the process. So that's kind of my lay terminology, just basic way. But again, I think it's been made a little bit too complex. So I guess I'd love to hear what anybody else has to think.
Rich, I'll certainly jump in there just to kind of add a layer to that. I thought you did a great job summarizing what maybe the practical applications of the concept and idea is, but sort of to Wyatt's point, we can't have a conversation about self-organization if we're not going to talk about systems and the interactions and relationships among those systems. Because the fact of the matter is, and probably my biggest irritation within the community in the field with the confusion of self-organization is, as long as you adopt a systems approach and a systems thought process to movement behavior of any sort, the driving example that you utilized, the birds that we typically use, the murmurations, the human movement system interacting with this alive environment in the reciprocal relationships and exchanges that exist there. It's about collective system behavior. And if you believe in system thinking, which I believe that most people would probably, even those that might think a little bit more traditionally about motor behavior, they're still going to probably adopt some level of systems thought process. And if you do, what you realize is self-organization isn't just something we do sometimes. Like, it's not just throwing the athlete out there. You could have direct instruction, and it's still going to be a self-organized behavior that is going to emerge. It isn't sometimes people self-organize and sometimes people don't. We are all always self-organizing. And so I'm sorry to get fired up there in the first 7 minutes of the conversation this evening, but I think that's the thing that people are forgetting. When you see people on Twitter say something along the lines of like, well, there goes that self-organization crew again. Like, okay, you just don't even believe in human movement behavior and the emergence of it at all. So I think that's where we have to start. And hence the reason why, obviously Emergence and the brand and the company emerged in the way that it did, as a self-organizing collective behavior among interacting component parts who are all having a behavior emerging from our collective relationship amongst us. So us as interacting component parts, whether it's the team at Emergence that you see here, or whether it's this greater community coming together, our collective behavior is going to emerge out of these interactions and these relationships.
Very well put. And one thing that I will add to that before anyone else wants to jump in is the information that's flowing through a system that allows for a system to self-organize. And so, as Sean eloquently stated, we're always self-organizing, but some ways it's functional to meet the nuances of the problem at hand, whether those are sporting problems, rehabilitation problems, just locomotion problems in life, or it's in a non-functional way to where the individual is connecting the information, but the information that is specifying opportunities for action is putting the individual or the individuals in a situation where they are not able to solve said problem or the problem at hand because of their sensitivity to information that may be more specifying in that particular situation. So when we think about the adaptability of system components, it's the system components at the perceptual level, the cognitive level, the motor level that are entangled together to where what gives rise to this functional behavior or these synergy formations that may form within a system or between systems, if we're talking about team sports, and you see this beautiful transformation of movement, whether that is advancing the ball down the court, down the pitch, whether that's murmurations, or I'll even take it a step further. I just returned home from Mexico. We were snorkeling in the ocean. I love snorkeling for a number of reasons. I love robust marine life and just watching all the colors and everything that's happening. But you want to talk about self-organization, and I know images that are often used are schools of fish, murmurations of birds, traffic patterns. Obviously, like I alluded to there, a basketball team that's advancing down the court because the ball bounced off the rim. Maybe it was the angle of the shot. Maybe it was the transition of the team. It was the how the shot was, how flat it was, which is going to give rise to the potential for it being a missed basket, which then transitions the ball the opposite way. But I was in the ocean and I'm watching this school of fish. And you've got waves that are crashing in, that are moving out. So there's information, okay, through the form of energy flows that is available to these animals, to these fish and other animals within the ocean, myself included, to where we're kind of
ebbing and flowing, feeling, flowing with that information. And I say feeling, what I mean by feeling is all the perceptual systems in the form of visual perception, kind of seeing the way the waves are moving, maybe bubbles that hit the surface that are, giving rise to this crashing sensation. So there's going to be turbulent or more turbulent waters. It's actually the proprioceptiveness of feeling it. But this school of fish, I'm watching this school of fish, and it was in Los Cabos, Mexico. So if you guys know anything about the Sea of Cortez, it's relatively rough, but it's even rougher on the Pacific side. And so it's called the aquarium of the world, just in case you guys are curious, because there's like 75% of the marine life in the world are in this one area between the Baja Peninsula and the mainland of Mexico. But that's neither here nor there. So my point being is that these fish were moving together as one. Now, there wasn't like one big sergeant fish that's like commanding from the front, telling these fish how to move. But these fish, based on the interpersonal distances from one another, because they're schooling together, the flow of the water that's moving, the rocks that are nearby. And I watched these fish as the waves were crashing, and there was coral and rocks nearby, and they would squeeze together, which would cause this accordion type effect in the rest of the fish. But I didn't hear any communication as far as you need to behave in this particular way. I'm the lead fish. I'm the one that you have to behave behind and behave like. Rather, it was the adjustability and adaptability of these system components by the information flow through the system that gave rise to this emergent behavior. And that's what we see as a self-organization tendency that occurs in complex systems. And that's one of the beautiful parts about it. But now bringing it back to sport, and I'll be very brief with this part, we're not here, as Rich stated, as just passive bystanders, as a practitioner or anybody that's involved in a rehabilitation setting that is trying to help aid athletes to return to play or aid athletes in becoming more adept movers. Rather, it's the constraints on behavior. So once again, one other thing that Sean mentioned that coaches just, so I don't believe in self-organization, that self-organization crew. One other thing that you hear from social media is the CLA. Well, I don't use the CLA. No, everybody uses constraints. It's just rather you're using and you're purposely using them. So if we think task, individual, and environment, the individual, how they are, who they are when they're coming to the party, the time of the session, whether that's rehabilitation, the time of practice, the motivational levels, how the intentions are flowing, and then how many players are there that day, how many opponents, how many teammates. All of this is informative. And really where the art of coaching lies, how we can facilitate the process of self-organization, utilizing constraints on behavior, is channeling and nudging to create strengthened invitations that are maybe beckoning or nudging an individual or individuals to perform or behave in certain ways without commanding them and telling them they have to do something. Because if we want sticky practice, okay, and sticky behavior to then transfer to a team setting, which occurs over varying timescales of learning, we have to allow the constraints, which, yes, sometimes are explicit instruction. Sometimes it comes in the form of allowing the environment and the athlete to communicate and have this relationship and dialogue together in order for self-organization to emerge. And then the skillful nature of a coach is knowing when, why, and what you're manipulating, and potentially even how you're manipulating it to continue to see this emergence of fruitful or just abundant movement solutions.
Tyler, a few things that you had to say in there, obviously more than a few. You kind of had a mic drop moment, excuse me. It's been a long day. A little bit mic drop moment throughout, mostly with the sergeant fish analogy, but also with some other things. Obviously, and this is a question that I want to pose to the group, but Tyler, you kind of started to allude to this or unpack this to a certain degree. The accusation that we often get when we talk about ecological dynamics, constraints-led approach, nonlinear pedagogy, and self-organization within those respective concepts is that self-organization or even the ecological framework just implies that we're going to throw the athlete into the game and we're going to let anything emerge. That which emerges, we're just allowing it to sort of be hands-off. Rich alluded to this in his answer as well. Is there anyone on the call, number one, I'm curious, who feels that way coming into the call, that that's really what self-organization is, that we're just tossing them out there, letting anything emerge, and then we're taking a step back and just, like wiping our hands clean of it? And so feel free to admit if that's the case, number one. Number two, if this is really like this misconception that's out there, does anyone have any hypothesis as to why the outside world feels that self-organization is that why did this misconception or misunderstanding kind of come to be within the community? Does anyone have any hypothesis on that at all? So you can choose to answer either one of those questions if you so desire.
I'll definitely take a stab at it. The second question you pose is really intriguing. I can get the wheels turning a little bit there. I feel like that one of the main reasons that maybe an ecologically friendly group or individual is viewed as someone that is just this kind of let them figure it out approach is our pedagogical voice being quieter. Rich has used that before in presentations. I believe that's from James Rudd and colleagues as far as them using that. You've heard me use back in as far ago as underpinnings and before, the environment speaks very loudly, and it's because of that relationship between the performer and the environment. It's not that the coach isn't there. It's just that they're coaching. I mean, funny timing for today, our social media post was actually elucidating just this, that coaching occurs in many ways. But it doesn't have to be a verbal way necessarily all the time, like outwardly saying something. Rather, it can be by manipulating the start time of a practice. So to answer your question directly, I feel as though it might be because we are quieter in some ways, which actually isn't always the truth, especially when you're in a setting with any of the coaches. I know Danny Newcomb has said this recently, where people are surprised when they come out to one of his sessions, like, oh, you actually communicate a lot more than I realize. Carl and I have talked about that. Carl Woods and I have talked about that a lot, like utilizing ecologically friendly questions, such as, it's raining outside. How do you feel as though the way the field is right now, the dampness of the field and the conditions of the surface are going to impact the way you move the ball to your teammates? So I'm not saying move it differently. I'm just drawing their attention to the environmental conditions, which allows for them to start to search for ways that they may be able to lift the ball a little bit when they're passing it to the wing. So you're engaging with the athletes still, but you're not saying pass the ball this way, dribble this way. As soon as you get to this point, pass to this person. So in real short, Sean, my answer is I feel as though it's because we are likely quieter in some situations as far as our pedagogical voice.
I actually kind of had a thought as a man of the general populace. I guess with that second question, at least the experience that I had working with Tyler and Rich, I mean, sometimes when you're kind of taking that constraints-led approach or self-organizational approach, you kind of are playing the trial and error game in a sense. There was times where I remember asking Rich, like, hey, should I try this? I thought this up. And he said, see what happens. You know what I mean? And there was value to it. Sometimes it would happen, or we would go through the exercise and we would come away saying, okay, how can we make it better? And I think obviously there's a lot of value to having those conversations, but I think a lot of coaches, especially that their scripted practice, when you script practice, it goes well every single time, and so they see that as, okay, well, see, we're being efficient, we're getting more things done, versus sometimes I think people could probably look at the approach that folks like you take, and they're saying, well, you're taking too long. You see a lot more errors because sometimes, a kid, especially if they're not used to taking ownership of their own movement and taking ownership of how they kind of see what's going on around them, they're not being told X, Y, Z. All of a sudden they have a lot harder of a time getting into that. I saw that with my own track athletes. Like all of a sudden I kind of gave them a little bit more responsibility and they look completely lost because they were used to being told exactly how to do everything. So I think sometimes it's tough because when we come in and try to have those conversations and take different approaches, it looks sloppy day one. And a lot of times you're only given day one to prove what you can do. So I don't know if maybe it's an impatience thing or something along those lines, but in a way you see it all the time with coaches where it's like, okay, well, I scripted everything and went perfect, so I must be a great coach.
I mentioned obviously over on the side there, Wyatt, well for what? You said every time out when you script it, it goes well, or now you just said perfect. the point that I would like to make to those coaches who expect the motor behavior within practice to go well, or the practice activities to go well, or the execution to be perfect, the thing that we have to check back to is, what are the intentions of the session? Is it for the session to actually drive perfect movement, or for perfect behavior to be that which what emerges? And then, of course, if somebody's going to answer yes to that, we have a whole new can of worms that we have opened. Or is the session for learning? Is the session for skill acquisition? Is the session for transfer to the actual competitive performance environment? And most coaches, most that I've met from the NFL level all the way down to Pee Wee, would say that it's for something later on. It's not about this right now. So why do you feel as though we have to be so married to this idea of practice being undertaken well, or for behavior to be perfect?
Right. I honestly think games are less frequent than practice. You know what I mean? And I think that absolutely games are what should be the determining factor if practice is working. But when I think people get really caught up in, going from throughout the week. Let's say you have Monday through Thursday practice, and starting on Monday was a bit rough, but you're kind of going through things over and over again, and it just seemed like it was getting better. I think you see coaches just getting excited. They're like, okay, well, see, now we're getting better. We're being more efficient. Everything, again, is that I think things are going well. I think we've shown improvement, and then you get to game day, and you hear it all the time. I mean, Sean, I've seen you tweet about it many times of, like you see coaches saying, well, I don't really understand what went wrong. I don't know why, we're playing so poorly when practice went so well this week. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's what I was touching on with, they see things as going well because it went how they thought it would look in their head at practice, but they aren't thinking, again, that next step. I don't think there's any coach out of there that's practicing for practice. I think at least on purpose, but I think in actuality, a lot of them kind of are falling into that trap. And that's where they're tracking to see if they're, in their mind, improving, or their athletes are improving. They get caught up in, are they seeing improvement in practice? Not, are they seeing improvement in game?
Leanna, I'd love to hear anything you want to share. You have an inquisitive mind, and obviously you've been using these ideas for some time, and especially coming from a different perspective. I would love to hear anything you want to share. It doesn't have to be those two questions necessarily.
Thank you. It's great to finally be joining you. So I'm a physiotherapist in Australia, and I've been inspired by Keith David and been in communication with him for about, 10, 15 years. And so I've been playing around with a lot of these concepts in the clinical space, trying to answer the question of how pain and injury interfere with skillful movement behaviour, so that we can try and really shift the focus in the clinic. But to answer why we may think that self-organisation is thought to be, we're just sort of throwing someone in to see what survival mode they can come up with, I think there's a couple of things. One is that we're not comfortable with uncertainty, and that actually ties in pretty strongly with what Wyatt said about scripting practice, or scripting a rehab session or a clinical session to have setting parameters that you want to search through in the space, rather than seeing what arises through the setting up certain conditions. The other thing too, I think, is around interpretation. So when you do have a strategy that is trying to stimulate self-organisation, if we have something that is successful, it's easy to interpret. If it doesn't go, if our ability to interpret that is not within a framework that we're actually used to, I think that's also a real problem. So, for example, I might be able to trying to stimulate someone to not focus on their knee in their rehab and stimulate themselves out of that sort of knee strategy for balance. And so as soon as you I've had examples where we've set something up and that's changed, and all of a sudden they're in a much more search space, and there's way more, less balance, but more stimulus and search through the whole system. And I've had physios say, and the patients say, I'm worse. So that interpretation of, I've shifted you out of your strategy. I want you out of that sort of landscape where you're attracted to moving in that way. And then when you are unbalanced and in that search, you're using more whole body strategy, which gives you much more ability to interact with a space. So I think there's uncertainty we're not comfortable with, and self-organization introduces that a lot. And then the other thing is about, who's it about? Is it about the coach? Is it about the physio? And is it about me ticking off that I have, introduced balanced strategies and I've introduced these things and therefore I've rounded out a good rehab program? Or is it that I've actually, looking at shifting behavior? So they're the things that I think play a role.
It's really interesting. All of it was, but especially that last part, as far as like, did I tick off this box or did I address balance? And it's interesting because if you would have said that, I would listen to you 5 years ago and then beyond, I just kind of would have nodded my head, or if another physio would have said that. But now I realize balance is context specific, and it's dependent on what the task is. It's dependent upon how they are, who they are that day. And so it's really intriguing because we like to have these really neatly defined boxes that we're checking or things that we're doing if it's on a practice script, but yet we forget that it's different for each individual and that our job as a coach is to help facilitate that way they have ownership of their movement, because we want them to either return to life or play or sport, whatever it is that they're doing, or we want them to perform well on the field. So we have to consider whenever we are doing certain things, we are manipulating constraints, and those constraints are influencing that emergent behavior. And emergent doesn't always mean good either. Emergent behavior can be poor. Their emergent decision making can be poor. If I am interacting with the confluence of opportunities for action, okay, or affordances, or potentially even invitations that are inviting me at varying strengths, just because I perceive one and actualize that affordance doesn't mean that was the right one. And that's another thing intertwined with self-organization that I think is misunderstood in the community. And so for me, I wanted to bring that out because, to your point, and the way that you're doing it, and I've followed a lot of actually what you and Javi were interacting with just the other day, which is a really unique discussion on Twitter, that it's so enlightening to see that it's happening in other spaces other than just the coaching realms, that it's happening in the clinician world as well. So kudos to you.
The last 25 minutes really reminded me of something that Danny Newcomb tried to highlight at the Sport Movement Skill Conference in his session, when he was talking about the case study of field hockey, the professional field hockey level, where he posed a question to the group where he said, are we attempting to increase an athlete's ability to solve specific problems, or are we attempting to increase the problem-solving skills or abilities of a performer? And if you really think about that distinction, obviously, most people probably know which side I stand on, even though people like Tyler and Rich and myself, we're always talking about ideas of representative task design. But what we want to do is allow them to interact with the problems in a wide breadth of problems. And you heard, obviously, that reflected within Tyler's answer in regards to the information that may regulate one's actions, or more specifically, the affordances that are going to be specified in that information, and how we want to actually allow that performer or player or athlete or human to interact with that wide variety of complex, interactive, and emerging movement problems. All of a sudden that's a totally different mentality than if they're going to go try to solve specific problems. So I think when we talk about this, whether it's in a physio, therapeutic type of endeavor, whether it's in a general physical preparation, gyms, health clubs, etc., or whether it's in sport or just for life as a whole, I think we have to think about this. Are we having them or attempting to increase their ability to solve specific problems, or are we actually attempting to drive or facilitate, channel their problem-solving skills or problem-solving abilities?
I have a question for the group. Do you feel as though there is ever a time, I know we've said, like just like Rich's analogy when he kicked it off with throwing someone in the deep end of a pool and just kicking back a lawn chair. Obviously we wouldn't do that, but is there a time where we are encouraging our athletes to just figure out what is possible in a particular setting? I mean, clearly there's always constraints that are going to be influencing or channeling that emergent behavior. But if the idea or session intention or even particular task intention is purely exploration in order for them to see if they can connect to a wide range of informational sources, do you feel as though that can be beneficial? And if so, would anybody dare to give us a time, maybe in a particular season, where that might be beneficial?
I'll try to take a little bit of a stab at it, and I'm sure MZ might have something to say too. But I feel this youth space, I feel like there's some situations where this is exactly what you're hoping for in a given session, where you potentially are not really training for any one particular sport, and all you're really doing is maybe I'll use an obstacle course as an example. And you're setting up a bunch of obstacles and objects and situations and pieces of equipment for these kids to interact with. And it's not really about one outcome. It's not really about winning or losing. It's just about, hey, what do these pieces of equipment and what does this space afford me to do? And essentially what you are telling the kids to do, the athletes to do, is just explore, figure out what you can and can't get away with. And this is what we've talked about in Origins a number of times. And you just all of a sudden take a step back and you see a tremendous amount of variability within how different individuals can solve different problems, especially at that lower level. I mean, you get these kids that are just, they're different sizes and they just think differently. And so I think that in this youth space, I think there's a place for it potentially in other areas, but I think in particular, I've witnessed it in the youth space, where if we're really trying to promote the idea of adaptability and abundance, and we really want these kids to actually explore and figure out what they can and can't do, I feel like that's a space where it could be largely beneficial. I've seen it be beneficial. I know it is.
Yeah, actually, another example of what you're saying is even Tyler. I follow you on Instagram, and you post the videos of you and your kid, jumping over trees and running up hills and all sorts of stuff. And I always thought it was kind of interesting watching how you like to be explorational in and of yourself, obviously. But, and so you'll jump over the tree a different way every single time, but so will your kid, and I think there's a lot of value with seeing how, a young mind already getting used to movement as a whole. And as they grow up thinking about exploring the world, it's seeing how many different ways can I do this? Can I figure out a more efficient or, way to get over said obstacle? So yeah, I agree that I think the highest value is starting as young as possible. I know the question was about season, but I think that's probably the highest values, especially if you're doing stuff with youth groups, like Rich said.
Those are two really, really, really valuable ads, and obviously tugging at my heartstrings there as far as there's so many reasons why we do that. But I think that one of them is exactly what Rich was explaining and what you're picking up as far as the videos. It's not like I'm just out there doing my own thing and there's somebody behind me. I didn't realize that. It's without me needing to overly communicate what could be possible. It's that observational type learning, but allowing for him to figure out what he can do based on his action capabilities, what he's picking up as opportunities for him and how he can go about moving in the world. And then just kind of nudging that behavior in that particular way. That way he's in a lot of ways wayfinding his way through, to borrow from that idea from Woods and colleagues, to where, he's knowing as he goes, and he's knowing as he goes because he's open and he's responsive to a landscape. He's not closed off because his sensitivity has been dampened by a coach or by an individual that's telling him he needs to behave in a certain way. And so I don't mind you taking it in that direction by any means. I asked the question just because, we're not just ever freely not even showing up at a session. I'll be in the parking lot, do whatever you want to do. It's more you're nudging certain things and you're there, but it's allowing for mistakes to occur. And we've talked about that quite often, where, yes, we need to be mindful of the potential for injury that could arise from that, specifically in a clinician setting. But we also want to allow them to move in ways where there are degrees of freedom across systems. Okay, so not just what we can see as far as their actual, motor system degrees of freedom, but what their search looks like, maybe what they're trying to pick up from an auditory standpoint. We can maybe amplify certain affordances that are asking more of a perceptual system if they're overly relying on a visual system. It could be more sense of touch. So American football is a sport I work with a lot. And you have, if we take a linebacker position, so for those of you not familiar, the defensive position that plays just behind the one that has their hands on the line. And a lot of those linebacker positions have to use sense of touch quite a bit as they're fighting off blocks at the line of scrimmage. So we may design activities to where it's channeling that opportunity for them, and it's saying how many different ways can you shed the blocks that are going to come at you. So you're maybe illuminating the opportunity for them to realize they can use other perceptual systems, but it's never completely unentangled with their overall cognitive, because you're channeling their intentional search and how those intentions may be flowing at any moment in time. And so I think that that's an informative process and a very beneficial one, because if we allow for, and I say we collectively, we allow for exploratory processes throughout, obviously, adolescent and childhood, but then also in certain times of the year where they're not expected to perform at their peak. And I think that can replace a lot of this rote repetition that we're doing. And coaches, Wyatt, you hit the nail on the head. Coaches want to be overly scripted because they don't want to seem as though they don't know everything. They also want to see this really crisp behavior. And you start to see even some synergies emerge in that way, but the synergy formation that is formed by the constraints on behavior isn't a functional or even stable or flexible solution, or maybe it's an overly stable solution that's not flexible or adaptable whenever you are encountering a variety of different constraints. So I think that that's something to be aware of, because if we talk about synergy formation that is because of constraints on behavior, we're looking for stable yet adaptable synergies, and allowing for the system itself to be able to transition and move through a lot of different options based on what they're connecting to. Too stable. That's spot on, Wyatt. What? So tell me why you feel as though, and you kind of already hit the nail on the head a couple of times with this, but I'd love to hear you take a crack at it one more time. Why do you feel as though a solution, and even though it's going to emerge slightly different each time, that attractor state, if you will, why might that stable pattern of organization, why might that be detrimental if that's all that emerged or similar solutions were emerging? How might that hinder or help an athlete?
Are you asking me directly or the group?
You're already unmuted, so I'd say you. Rich is unmuted as well, so he can take a crack at it.
Yeah, I think Rich should go first.
Say the question again.
I'll say it very, very simple this time. Why might it be detrimental to have solutions that are too stable? Attractor wells that are too deep, limited adaptability in a setting to where it may be required to solve problems in a variety of different ways.
I think you just you answered it for us a little bit. I mean, just limited adaptability. I think if you're unable to solve problems, we can use football as an example because we continue to. I mean, name a problem that's repeated 2 times on the field in a football game. There aren't any. And I think if we continue to chase these stable patterns and continue to chase this repeatability, all you're doing is sucking adaptability and their ability to adapt to these different problems, from their abilities. So I think you kind of answer it. It's that lack of adaptability. It's that lack of variability. If we're too stable, you're going to be rigid and you're not going to be able to be water, I guess,
That is fantastic. And Leanne answered the question earlier, probably knows that she did, but I mean, you said nudging an athlete out of an overly knee flexion position or something like that. I can't remember exactly what you said, but that might be very, very detrimental to a learner, just because it could cause concern for additional injury, or it may be exacerbating a problem. So I think that's another example. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, no, Sean just brought up a really good point, because I think that this is something that comes up a lot, and one that I think we all struggle with a little bit. But talking about a problem, a task, an event, I always think of pitching that is more stable in and of itself, and how this all plays into that. And I think that's a very why track. Yeah, I was just going to track and field is the one. So I guess, where do you feel? In your opinion, where do you feel this plays a role in the track and field setting?
Actually, I was thinking of this too. I did want to say another thing about, with finding maybe too attractive of a solution. Something that popped in my head as you were speaking was I've seen it with a lot of high school kids, is they're waiting for them to need to perform that solution, if that makes sense. They're almost waiting for the problem to emerge in a certain way, and they're missing everything else around them. And it can take away from their ability to be adaptable. Maybe the athlete is actually very capable at adjusting and, kind of going with the flow. But if they're so locked in on waiting, they're like, hey, you have to see this one thing, and that's your time to go. If they never see it, or if, if they can't actually respond because they're being almost too patient. I feel like I remember a time where, Sean, maybe it was you, when you were working with some baseball players, you were talking about how you were kind of experimenting with something and you saw that they got too patient. They were waiting for that right pitch because they could almost see the ball too well. I think that's a perfect example of how they knew what this perfection looked like, but it just never really came. As for track, I think an example of it is, I think something I'll see is, kids might go into a race with an expectation of how it's going to go. What does your perfect race look like, feel like? Are you going to catch a kid by a certain period of time? Is your start going to be perfect? So I think, you'll see it all the time where kids, like, they have a bad start, the block slip, or, I just didn't feel that well. And you just see everything else after that goes poorly. When it comes to running, it is not impossible to kind of fix your form partway through. It's tough, because you kind of get into a rhythm, but it's not impossible. But you'll kind of see a kid just, like, if they get past late, as another example, you see them just tighten up because something happened that they weren't ready to have happen, and that ruins everything. That's, I guess, an example I can think of.
Well, I think you just kind of brought light to the whole discussion. And the fact of the matter is, and exactly what Sean just posted, is that although it is a more stable task, I suppose, itself, you're still having to interact. I used to have this conversation with the track athletes at Concordia all the time, because I think one thing that track coaches like to do is find this repeatable form, just like pitching. I want to find a repeatable mechanical way to throw the ball that's always the same every single time. But what are we forgetting about? Well, we're forgetting about everything else around us. And so you just mentioned at the very end, what if someone passes you late? Then what happens? You think that doesn't affect the behavior of the person that's actually running? Well, you just said it does. And of course it does. And so when we talk about, is running more repeatable? Is there less variability in running a 100-meter dash than there is taking a handoff from a quarterback? Well, of course there is. But there's still other people on the track. There's still light. There's still a surface. There's still a host of other things happening. And so I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head there. Maybe you weren't even trying to, but there is still problems to interact with. There is still stuff going on, and there is certainly still things in the environment, those key performance inhibitors, the pressure, the anxiety, those are still going to shape and inform behavior. And so I think when we get too caught up in this idea of repeatability, even in something as stable as running, I think you really do hinder the athlete, because then what happens when something destabilizes you? Then what do? Well, I didn't practice for this. No one's ever passed me before in practice. Now what do I do? That type of thing. So I think that's a good add. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Any questions? I mean, I know we're digging a little bit into a rabbit hole here, but does anybody else have anything?
This is Chris. As I was listening to you guys talk or whatever, it sounded like to me is that the being stable, being more so fixated on that, that one thing, as you stated before. It seemed like to me if the athlete, like the way we do things in the military and stuff like that, is that you resort back to your training. Once you resort back to your training, you adapt to your environment and you adjust along the way. No matter what, the outcome is, you still adapt to that environment and you make decisions along the way. And you're collaborating, I guess, with your teammates and things like that, and you adjust and fire. That's the way I'm understanding what you guys are saying.
Well, yeah, Chris. I mean, I think you say you always fall back on your training, and I think if you again, what kind of the example that I just used, or the example that Wyatt brought to light is you need to train for variability. You need to train for instability. You need to train for a whole host of variety of things to happen, because you want to, at that point, when you go into competition, you want to have experienced a whole host of problems. And so I think you're 100% right. If we continue to train, if we continue to force our athletes into this repeatability, and we never allow them any sort of situation where they have to adapt, any sort of situation where they have to find multiple functional solutions to similar acting problems, I think you see them get tight. You see them lock up. And so I think that falling back on your training, if your training doesn't act or look or feel or behave anything like what you're training them for, then I think you're going to have some problems come game day, come competition day, when we're talking about military, anything. So.
And Chris, if you think about it just real quick before you jump in, if you think about taking apart a weapon and quickly putting it back together, you're under a time constraint. There's a lot of times there's going to be other individuals that are in play that are needing you to do something or help them execute a task. There can potentially be mimicking some type of threatening situation to where that pressure is going to cause anxiety, and that anxiety is going to influence the way in which your system degrees of freedom are organizing. So how quickly you can actually take it apart, how your intentions are flowing. And if you're practicing in a very relaxed, lackadaisical environment, then that's the type of behavior will likely emerge. But if you're performing under pressure and anxiety, then whenever you mention reverting back to your training, then hopefully that's the type of solution or solutions that may emerge. And I know, and sorry, my terminology may have been way off. My apologies.
No, you good. You spot on for me.
Cool deal. Adam?
Yeah, really the only thing I wanted to add, just hearing the track and field discussion, and I think even what Leanne put in the chat box about gymnastics routines and stuff like that, what immediately popped in my mind was like this false sense, or even when we were talking about we want the perfect technique in the throw, we want repeatable. The thing I would point to is just go stand on a force plate and see how much stability you actually have, how stable you are. You're constantly just adjusting and catching yourself and just trying to balance out your body. You're never fully stable. So this aim, you're always adapting. This aim for, I want this repeated over and over and over again. It's different each and every time if you actually go down and look at what's actually occurring within the body.
And to add one piece to it, as far as Sean was asking, for specific sports or specific examples of a more stable type sport or predictable type. If we take baseball, for example, that was mentioned a bit earlier as a pitcher, I'm initiating action. Now I'm always interacting with information such as what the count is, what inning it is at that time, where I'm playing, the depth of the backdrop, the surface that I'm pitching from. But why I mention this is if I'm in mid stride, okay, so my plant foot has planted, my lead foot is planted, and it's sliding as I'm going to throw, I'm going to have to adapt, and I'm going to have to essentially move in a way that allows for me to still throw the same pitch that was my intention to begin with. So if I was going to be throwing a fastball and I've never thrown in anything other than just a turf environment, or maybe I've only thrown off my mound, the likelihood of me being able to still throw strikes in a wet environment, or whenever the surface itself is a little bit stickier and my foot's catching, I'm not going to be very adaptable, likely not going to be throwing strikes. And so even with something like pitching, where I'm initiating action, you're still in a situation where if my foot slips, or if I'm in mid windup and the batter then steps off the plate a little bit. There's another example. So I was going to throw a pitch inside, and he happens to step back a little bit. Well, now he's going to be able to reach the ball in a different way. So as I'm literally in mid movement, okay, my intentions are changing, which means that the way I'm going to act is going to change. So that's just an example from just pitching itself that I don't think that very many people think of, specifically that latter one, because batters do move in the box. They move up, down, they slide back and forth, they move a little bit, they open up. And based on what pitch I was going to throw, the count and all those other confluence of the constraints are going to affect how I deliver that ball.
Well, and I just wanted to jump in there and remind people about the Bernstein blacksmith example, right? Like if we want to even use something that's predictable or something that appears to be a stable movement problem, something that we have rehearsed, maybe some routine, like in the gymnastics example, swimming, diving, et cetera, all those types of things, like we can find that obviously those tasks or the execution within them, even if the problem is relatively stable, the movement solution itself is still going to be highly variable. That's the inherent, reality that we all face as human beings. And I think that's a point that Adam made really, really well that I think we have to continue to kind of come back to, because obviously that's something that's proven over time, regardless of the level of learner, even if it is a somewhat stable movement solution or problem.
Can I just say, do you think that could be an education point, obviously with our athletes, that certainly those that are trying to, it's inherently repetitive, for example, gymnastics. I've worked with high level gymnastics and there's that, time and time again doing a half routine or a component part, which changes the whole nature of a full routine, and not understanding that there is inherent variability within each of those component parts or the full routine. It is natural to vary every time how you land that based on whatever factors are playing a part. But, it's a really, like Adam was saying about the force plate example, where what do they believe is really going on, whether it is attainable to repeat and perfect something versus having all of those features of expert movement systems available to take to those solutions. So it's an education point, both athletes and coaches, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Leanne. I think we just have to reframe the discussion to be able to educate both parties, right? Because I think there's still a bunch of coaches out there who don't understand this point, hence the reason why I think we always have to kind of come back to it in the realities of any kind of movement. I mean, to Adam's point, which I think is another great one, just even the aim of standing still has variation. Anything we do, I mean, you can watch me move around as I try to respond to a question, and I'm always moving, as anyone, any of the team at Emergence knows, or anyone who's heard me on these before. So if that's the case, I think we do have to bring it back to the point that we are making, regardless of the level of stability or flexibility that is required based on the problem. I think the biggest thing is that when we look at this, if we reframe the discussion around this inherent variability that the problem has, we know that the solution is going to be tied to that in sort of these functional semantics or this intertwined, interwoven relationship. If one has variability, and then so will the other, and they will constantly, perpetually feed back into one another, then in that way, that maybe even in those sports like gymnastics or the like, things that appear to be rehearsed, things that appear that where we're chasing perfection, is really what we're chasing is still adaptability.
Well, Sean, you just had your little mic drop moment there. I don't want to take it away from you, but does anybody else have anything they want to add? Any questions, any thoughts as we kind of wrap up this session? We still obviously have about 5 or so minutes, but is there anything else that's pressing on anybody's mind here?
If people don't, I certainly have a question to maybe end us off with, if I could, Rich.
Absolutely.
If we do believe that self-organization is obviously inherent in all systems and the behavior emerging is going to be self-organized based on these interactive component parts coming together in the interconnections and relationships, how do we go about leading or guiding a performer to more functional self-organization? Because obviously if all movement behavior, all behavior of systems is going to be self-organized and emergent, how do we go about setting an environment or a place, a space where that performer can more effectively, more functionally self-organize?
take a quick stab at it. I think a couple things come to mind for me. The idea, like kind of like what I talked about before, making sure that the problem and the scenario, the environment in general, is scaled to where that learner is at. Making sure that it's a digestible environment for them. And then I think another thing that comes to mind is guiding intentions and guiding attention. I know Tyler talked about it a little bit earlier as far as using lines of questioning and using analogies and things like that. When you're actually looking for an athlete to interact with specific pieces of information or potentially looking them to point them in a certain direction, it's trying to figure out how to guide them where to look, but not exactly telling them what to see. And so I just think that the scaling of equipment, the scaling of information, I think comes to mind. And then, like I said, guiding intentions, guiding attention, and being, actually engaging in legitimate conversation with the athlete. I think those two things come to mind to me.
I was just going to suggest, I think there's also a need to understand how adaptive an individual athlete is, and how do we learn that? Maybe just through the exploration process, to see, how responsive and how, whether you can shift someone out of an attractor state. I have this idea of, certainly in the clinic, am I treating the footballer playing football, or the footballer playing football against another team? And depending on how I think of that athlete in the clinical setting, if I'm treating the footballer, I'm looking at, basic things that may not relate at all to their emergent movement behaviour on the field. If I'm thinking about them playing against another team, then that's a very different space for me to consider clinically. And I think this is a space we need lots of development in to work through that. So we certainly don't have all the answers, but at least thinking about the right, different questions to ask will stimulate this conversation to think about how can we look at that. So, yeah.
I have a question, and you guys may have said it already. As far as like when you have, whether it's an athlete or whomever, when they go through this process with the constraints and you're watching them as they adapt and stuff like that, and you're gathering this data, and how do you convey that message to them so they can make the necessary adjustments, after everything is complete? What is that feedback? What does that look like?
It's a great question, Chris. Really, really good question. Because let's face it, if we've co-designed or even as a coach designed a setting and the athletes are or are not adapting their behavior, maybe it's within a single session, maybe it's across sessions. There are a number of ways to approach it. I think some on the call, some of which who have listened to my presentation recently at the Sport Movement Skill Conference, know involving the athlete and their experiential knowledge in the design process is a key way to do so. So, for example, if a particular behavior we have identified a non-functional solution across a lot of situations, maybe it's a backhand in badminton, maybe it's a backhand in tennis, to where they seemingly find themselves in that situation to hit that shot quite often, but they're not winning the point that way. It's how can we involve the athlete to design an activity that is going to either reward them to hit an overhand shot or to find a way to get into an overhand shot position. That's just one example. By confining the space, maybe it's assigning a point system, more points to that particular solution versus another. So you're not telling them that they still can't hit a backhand, especially if a backhand is needed in that situation, but you are nudging that behavior of trying to find, picking up information, becoming sensitive to information that allows them to hit an overhand shot. So in the short answer, involving the athlete. So whether that is pre-session, whether that's within the session, or assigning maybe a homework assignment for the athlete to design something that they feel as though will slightly challenge them, or maybe if it reduces the intensity of the activity because we saw them not performing very well, and it was maybe because they were too many opponents on the field. Maybe it was there was too much pressure. There were people that were observing the session, which was causing them to freeze the way that they moved. So I think co-design, in short, is a really strong and a solid way to do that. I think that watching film with an athlete, so I don't get a chance to do this. I haven't in the past year as much so, but prior to this past year, watching several sessions or parts of a session, either with an athlete or hopping on Zoom and watching it, and just more walking through what was going on, not necessarily saying, tell me why you behaved in this particular way. It was more using those questions still to kind of guide their search process, in subsequent sessions, how it may educate their intention in certain sessions, and then drawing upon that knowledge in the form of kind of bringing up those ideas to where we're kind of educating their intention. So how they aim to interact, like, where their intentional flow is at that time, whether it's a rapid pace, whether it's trying to lift a shot in soccer or in tennis or in badminton. So kind of like Rich mentioned earlier, you're educating their intention, but also their attention to spaces or maybe to sound. Something that Sean and I were discussing today with someone on the Movement Academy who works in badminton, and they were talking about working in doubles, and the team they may not be playing as well together, but yet they're not really sensitive to the auditory information that can be very specifying, such as where they may be behind them in order to receive a particular shot. So kind of drawing the athlete's attention to how do you feel as though that your teammate and what noise they may be making could be informative to how you are behaving. And so you're not telling them you're not telling them what they need to hear, but you're opening up their ears to what could be heard.
Okay.
Well, and I think on that note too, Chris, it probably also depends on the level of the learner, as well as then maybe the task that we're talking about and the problem that we have placed in front of him or her, because I think that will determine maybe how they're interacting, of course, number one, but number two, maybe the level of feedback that we could offer. I think oftentimes as coaches, or specifically performance coaches or movement skill acquisition coaches, we're often fixated on the biomechanics or the motor pattern that we see emerging, as opposed to asking them questions or offering them feedback, guidance or communication that could potentially be framed around what they are perceiving or how they are thinking, much to Tyler's point. So what my advice would be there for almost all would be that when allowing them to interact with said problems, in solving said problems, remember that it's a multi-dimensional movement problem-solving process. It's not, when we say movement, we're not just insinuating motor patterns or the action that emerges. What we are really talking about is the perceptions, the cognitions, and the actions all being intertwined and interwoven. And that means we can offer feedback or guidance, communication, whether it's explicit or whether it's more implicit, in nudging them to different ways of solving that problem.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything pertaining to self-organization or synergy formation between or within systems? Anything that you're curious about? Why successful teams perform in the way they do? How they may go about practices? Why they might be adaptable even under situations that are less than representative? Any questions that anybody has?
So I do have a question. It's probably a longer question than we have time for. But one of the things I'm working with a fairly elite group of women right now, and a lot of them are adapting super well to the problems we're setting up for them in practice, and they're like, it's within rugby, and so like they're running, passing, catching. Their awareness of space is incredibly good on the practice field, and there's some of them that just don't translate that to game situations. So when we've had scrimmages, there's been people who, from reviewing all the like practice footage and even fairly interactive, like playing sessions in practice, that we would think, would highlight doing really well and progressing. And they're just not, they're kind of reverting back to what they where they were pre the last year and a half. And so it's just one of those existential questions in some ways of like, we're making what we think is representative, but obviously for this particular set of athletes, are we not, or is it just they're not seeing the movement solutions in the game like they did in practice?
There's multiple ways to attack that, and yes, as you stated, there it might be larger than what we have time for. But hey, that means we can use this topic for a subsequent movement meetup. So now you give us an idea. So cheers to you. I think there's a couple things there. I think number one, looking at how representative is representative enough. That's a question that's asked, so many times, and I ask myself that question sometimes. Like, it's going to change. It's not just like, oh, now it's representative for this person always, because their skill set is adaptive for a reason. Arugio and David's in their 2011 paper, it's like skill adaptation is ever changing. It's something that is ever evolving. But how is representative enough for them at this moment in time? And so it might not even be challenging them whatsoever in a way to where their lines look really pretty. They're operating in space well. Not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. It's just that there may need to be more complexity injected into the problem to where you are able to destabilize some of these what seemingly as though really functional solutions to see how well they actually are adapting, and how sensitive they are to shared affordances or opportunities for action, such as space that's emerging, and I'm able to perceive affordances for other individuals by seeing the gap that then emerges, and I move inward to create more space and then offload the ball. Because I've perceived that there's space that I feel as though my teammate is able to pass through that gap. But I'm not going to know that unless I'm challenged in a way that is going to nudge me to behave in certain ways. And that's just a single example, but that'd be one. I also would encourage you to consider, and you may have already considered this, so my apologies if you already have, but the time scale of learning. So something I struggled with, definitely struggled with it before, but struggled with it even in the earlier stages of my ecological usage, was thinking, I needed to see this within like a session or two. Otherwise, I wasn't applying the constraints appropriately. But yet that athlete may have not even perceived that opportunity. And it might not have been so there was a unique confluence of them based on how we're analyzing video, communication that's occurring, representative task design or co-design at that point to where we actually see that occur. So keep that in mind, where it may not be one practice or another, even if the setting is very representative. So I think everybody's scale of 1 to 10 is different, but 10's the game, right? And we don't always need it to be a 10, and it shouldn't be, because the game is the teacher, but the game isn't the teacher. It is the teacher in the fact that they're going to learn how to go about being and doing within a game, but that is likely going to be beyond the complexity or the challenge point or beyond their optimal grip over the field of affordances. So we may need to reduce that complexity. But if it's not high enough, it's not going to challenge them to see how, if they have multi-stability or if they have anti-fragility as an athlete. So I would say start there, injecting some more complexity. I would also, last to add here, and I want Sean to go, I know his hand up, would be looking at when the constraints on behavior are the same girls running the same lines together as you see them forming in the game. Is there more pressure and anxiety from a social expectation standpoint in the game, but it's not available in the practice setting because there's not parents that are present, there's not other teammates that are present, or other opponents that are present. I know Sean and I have talked about this before in conversations, but injecting those environmental, socio-cultural constraints can be very, very beneficial, because you start to see people legitimately freeze their degrees of freedom when they're performing, because there's now maybe there's boys that are around and that they know.
So can I, sorry. So we've been in a bubble, and like everything's been filmed. So like, and every day we review film. So I had actually never thought about the bubble itself being kind of a wholly separate environment than what they're going to be dealing with in a game type setting. Is that something that, I mean, we have to be in a bubble. Is that something that we like, should we be trying to address that with, doing the college football thing of like pumping music randomly to try and just make background noise or something.
So just to clarify before I try to help out here, when you say bubble, like you legitimately mean like a bubble, like a dome bubble, or do you mean bubble in the fact that you're not around other individuals? COVID. Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
That's what makes this a very challenging situation. But the same ideas still apply across conditions, regardless of whether it's COVID timeframe or not. But it certainly applies during COVID, to where there are limited interactions with individuals that they may be playing against, or that may be even observing whenever they're playing. And so if you think about others being present in the form of parents, in the form of boyfriends, girlfriends, in the form of peers that you admire or look up to, that you're now needing to perform in front of, that you might not have been during practice, that's an environmental constraint called a social cultural environmental constraint that will influence the way that they perform, the way they behave. And then other environmental constraints, such as their lines may have looked really pretty and you guys were practicing at 10 a.m. or 5 p.m., but yet their games occur at a different time frame, and there's more humidity that's in the air. The heat is greater at that time, because then you're looking at different types of individual fatigue, and it's going to influence the motivational levels of the individual. So even though the lines and the passing lines, the gaps that are emerging, closing, their ability to pass through them, all the tries that were made could change substantially. So, okay, Tyler, that all sounds great. Well, how do I go about influencing that? Changing practice time. I'm not saying you aren't, but changing practice times, inviting people to the session, allowing for more variability or even more complexity in the form of teammates and opponents, to where you are setting up multiple problems for them to solve, still documenting kind of the outcomes of what's occurring. And then you can go about challenging them to explore in different ways, or if they are performing really well across a lot of conditions, is to continue to challenge them with slightly different problems each time. I think Sean was quoted as saying, this was at an Altus event or something, I believe it was anyway, sometimes the best way to create better problem solvers is to create more problems for them to solve. And that wasn't verbatim, but it was something like that. And it's true in a lot of ways, because if we're not solving a number of problems, we're only solving one or two, we're going to become very stable with those solutions, going back to what we were discussing earlier. And then those stable solutions may emerge in a way that is positive. Leanne, thank you so much for dropping by. It's great to meet you. Great to see you. So hopefully that's helpful. So yes, yes, thank you. The bubble definitely matters. And sometimes it's unavoidable, but in your situation, even if it's you have the capability to even consider it, now that we're kind of changing, the world's changing a bit, it's very, very helpful. A little bit, maybe.
And I would just
where you're located.
I would just jump in there and add, and this is not a question that I'm asking you per se, Grant, because we might be here for a minute, but I would just ask this more as a rhetorical, not only for yourself, but literally for the whole group, is check what is or is not there in practice versus the game or competitive scenario or situation. Tyler alluded to this, obviously, in regards to key performance inhibitors, such as pressure, anxiety, fatigue, soreness, etc. What information may not be there? What types of slices of the game aren't the players interacting with that then you're expecting to have transference or carryover or correspondence to? And I think once we start doing that, we're going to see maybe where we're missing the boat and why an individual may not be behaving in the same way in the competitive arena as we believe that they are in the practice environment. And so I think the more that we're able to do that and find out what is really missing, we might find that they're not only our key specifying informational sources that we're not allowing to be present for that performer to interact with, but also we're not placing them under constraints that are similar to the game. Specifically, you hear a lot of people talking in speed and agility about not doing things in a fatigue state. But then in the third and fourth quarter of a football game or whatever task or activity in sport we're referring to, the player is performing and behaving under fatigue and having to solve agility-based or speed-based movement problems. Then that becomes sort of this like, how did we get into this hypocritical space where we're telling somebody that they always have to be fresh when they're doing their speed work, but the speed work that happens on a Friday night football game happens under a fatigue state. some, just as an example. And Tyler brought up a great example, specifically with the pressure and anxiety of who's watching the practice or who's watching that athlete perform, and how does that differ maybe in the competitive arena.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
I have responses to some of those stuff, but as I said, it's a much broader question that I've been struggling with for the last week or so being here. And every night I go through the video and it's like these people are really getting it. Their skills are really progressing. And I've been with this group for over a year, and it's like, oh, they're progressing, they're learning. And then we put them into a game, and it's definitely some pressure. But it's just second guessing what we're doing to try and figure out how to best affect the athlete.
I have two follow-up questions. These are really easy ones, but I think this is a conversation we should continue because this is very intriguing. And this is a really simple question. I should have asked this before, but there are opponents on the field, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I just was curious because I sometimes forget to ask that, but then we get kind of the nuts and bolts of it. And it was a lot of offensive attacking with very limited destabilization from the other side. So I just wanted to confirm. And are you in the States or are you abroad? Where are you located, if you don't mind me asking?
We're in Colorado.
Okay.
But per our national organization, we have very strict COVID bubble protocol that we all had to sign.
Gotcha. No worries. You just said you were still in a bubble, and I know there are places that for sure are. I was curious, so I appreciate it. So I think that's it, guys. Well, I really appreciate everyone joining. For those who are still on the call, a lot of the newcomers here, Grant, we've seen you a couple times, but it's been a bit. Hayden, Chris, thank you for chiming in, asking the questions that you did. That's spectacular. Wyatt, good to see your face as always. I appreciate the engagement. Leanne, I would imagine you'll listen back to this later on. So thank you for joining, and all the others that joined. So thank you so much for all the contributions, the interactions, the questions, and the conversation. It just makes it more enjoyable for everyone, really and truly, because I don't want to hear myself talk the entire time. I sure don't want to hear Sean. So I greatly appreciate all you guys sharing. And as always, thank you for supporting Emergence, and we look forward to engaging with you guys here soon.